This is Wardson number 2, narrated by Deva Winblood for the steamit.com blog by @dwinblood. Here There Be Monsters, Wardson number 2. When I was around 11 years old, and for a few years on either side of that, I had a fascination with sharks. Shark Week on the Discovery Channel was one of the great times to be glued to the television, if I could convince the other people in the common room of the orphanage that sharks were the thing to be watching. As an odd child named Andalus Colleen Wardson, I saw things regularly that scare the average people more than simple sharks. I have previously stated that such things were as normal to me as butterflies and moths. Sharks are an impressive form of life no matter where you are and what you are. I also learned some things about the shadows that I could see by observing sharks. One night, a group of kids older than me all gathered around a table, and they whispered and giggled as they put something down on it. At the time, I didn't pay a lot of attention to what it was they were putting down on the table. I was far more interested on how the shadows seemed to be reacting to them, and their excitement seemed to be a little bit like dumping chum in the water. The shadows gathered, and they moved this way and that, as if seeking something. They in fact moved a lot like sharks going past this group of teens to only turn around and come back. The amount of shadows gathering kept growing. In fact, this was the first time I had ever seen such a large and ever-increasing gathering. I remember thinking to myself, what is this shadow shark chum? It was only then that I walked a little closer to see what these teens were doing. They had a little board on the table that I could see appeared to have the alphabet and some other things on it. And there was something that the three of them had their hands on that was sitting on the board. They would move their hands around and say a letter or number or something. I noticed this generally came after they asked a question. I would later learn this thing was called a Ouija board. I didn't really care so much about the Ouija board at the time, as the shadows didn't seem to really have much of an interest in it. When I'd see one of the teens get excited and make exclamations or speak in hushed terms about spirits and something scary, that is when I noticed the shadow chum effect. It was like occasionally a flare was launched and the shadow sharks would draw closer to see what it was and where it came from. The shadows that the teens themselves exuded, as do all of us, were also at times expanding for a moment as a momentary bout of fear and adrenaline seemed to be in effect, only to return to normal. Back then, yes, back then, I knew much less. I couldn't ask someone else. I had to learn by observation and experimentation. I hadn't really begun to knowingly experiment at this age. This day did leave an impression, though, that would often be in my mind. It told me that the way people acted tended to attract shadows. Why? Why were the shadows acting as if in a feeding frenzy? I would learn more about that as I aged and saw more things. This ended up being a rather tame experience compared to most. And in hindsight, that is likely a lucky thing for me. It allowed me to ease into some things that, had I been tossed into before I knew how to swim, might have left me with a shattered mind. Or perhaps I am just speculating again. I do think it is likely either my mind would be shattered, or I would potentially have become someone or something dark. Ouija boards would always get a shrug from me after that. But I did like observing the shadow dance around them when they were in such a state. I would learn that other things could lead to this as well, and yes, I eventually would understand the chum of the shadow sharks.